Hello, and welcome to Hadassah Magazine Presents. I'm your host, Lisa Hostein, the executive editor of Hadassah Magazine. I'm honored to be in conversation today with Yossi Klein Halevi and Lee Yaron to talk about some of the seminal issues facing Israel and the Jewish people today. Together, we are just beginning to emerge from 2 years of an intense and devastating war sparked by the Hamas massacre of October 7, 2023. Yet antisemitism continues unabated, and the uncertainty of what comes next, both for Israel and American Jewry, continues to hover over us. It feels like both communities are at a crossroads in some respect. We're lucky to have Yossi and Lee to help us unpack some of these issues, to talk about what's next at this critical time. Thank you to all of you in the audience for joining us today. If this is your first Hadassah Magazine Presents program, a special welcome. And I hope you take the time to learn more about Hadassah and the work it does to heal those in Israel and in the world. If you're not already a member, please consider joining so you can enjoy the magazine, which is free with membership, as well as all the wonderful programming the magazine and the rest of Hadassah provides. And of course, your donations are always welcome and valued. Links for both membership and donations are in the chat box. We welcome audience questions throughout the conversation. Please be sure to write them in the Q&A. And now to introduce our guests. Yossi Klein Halevi is a senior fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. He is co-host, together with Danielle Hartman, of the popular For Heaven's Sake, a Hartman Institute podcast. His 2013 book, Like Dreamers, won the Jewish Book Council's National Jewish Book Awards Book of the Year. His latest book, Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, is a New York Times bestseller and has appeared in 12 languages. Yossi, who made Aliyah from Brooklyn in 1982, has written for leading op-ed pages in North America and is a former contributing editor to the New Republic. He is frequently quoted on Israeli, Middle Eastern, and Jewish affairs in leading media around the world, and is one of the best-known lecturers on Israeli issues in the North American Jewish community and on North American campuses. He co-directs the Hartman's Institute Muslim Leadership Initiative, which teaches emerging young Muslim leaders in North America about Judaism, Jewish identity, and Israel. Lee Yaron, an award-winning Israeli journalist with the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, is the author of 10-7, 100 Human Stories, which this past year also won that same prestigious National Jewish Book Award, the Book of the Year, as well as the 2025 Natan Notable Books Award. She is to date the youngest recipient of the National Jewish Book Awards Book of the Year Award, and she was selected this year for the 2025 Forbes 30 Under 30 list. Her investigative journalism for Haaretz on corruption, social issues, and environmental concerns earned her the 2022 Yitzhak Livni Knight Award for Free Speech in Media. Welcome to you both. We're so delighted that you're here.
Thank you, Lisa. Great to be with you both.
So I want to start by asking both of you where you were 2 weeks ago when the last of the living hostages were released. And I'm sorry to add this, since so much has happened since that time, how you've been processing the events that have transpired since then. Yossi, you go first.
So hi, everyone. Great to be with all of you. I was like probably every Israeli who wasn't actually out on the streets physically greeting the convoy coming back. I was glued to the screen the whole day. I just went from clip to clip, channel to channel, and watching the same clips over and over again. And it didn't matter because it was re-experiencing that moment. And so it was for me, I think that many of us felt watching this that it was both joyful and cathartic in the sense that all of these emotions that we've held in check for 2 years, Israelis are experts at getting through a crisis, but the price that we pay for that is that we keep things in, and we're not a society that processes trauma very well. We're a society that we live with accumulated layers of unresolved trauma, and almost like an archaeological tell where you have interrupted periods of history. That I feel is the emotional or psychological condition of Israel. And so what I felt happening with the hostages being released was it was a rare opportunity for the country to actually cry. And I think everyone did, or so many of us did, and repeatedly through the day. And I think that we were crying not only for this moment, but for the everything we've gone through the last 2 years, and which we're going to have to again bury into one more unresolved layer of trauma. But it was this wonderful moment where of allowing ourselves to experience that.
Lee, what was your experience on that day?
I was in the US, in Florida, Tampa, as part of this book tour I've been doing for many, many months now. So I wasn't home, but I felt at home. I was just sitting in a hotel room, not going to sleep that day, just watching the clips like Yossi and every other Israeli and so many American Jews, and crying and just feeling this day of joy and relief that we've been waiting for so long, and thinking about these families. I spent so much of the last 2 years just speaking with these bereaved and hostages families, seeing what they've been through. So I've been so relieved for them. But I agree with Yossi that, that was the day that we started our healing. But then you need to ask yourself, what is healing? And if we want to go back, to October 6th, then you remember what we were experiencing, and the fact that Israel was on the verge of a civil war, and on all the conflicts we had, in among us before this war. And I think this is also the day when we started feeling not just the trauma, but the post-trauma. And in the same days when the hostages were coming back, people in Israel were speaking about two cases of bereaved families who committed suicide those days, that were 2 years after 10/7. A boyfriend of Mapal Adam, a young woman who was murdered in the Nova Festival, committed suicide. A mother of another young man who went to the Nova Festival took her life as well. We just saw data about over 280 soldiers who tried to commit suicide in the last year. And I think, now when we're like not frozen on this day of 10/7, we start feeling our emotions, and they are very big and strong and difficult emotions to deal with.
Hmm. We're going to get into a lot of those issues. Yossi, I want to read a passage from the essay that you wrote for us recently in Hadassah Magazine, a very powerful essay that I think spoke to a lot of people. And there are a lot of issues that I want to unpack there, but I want to read a quote from your essay. To be a post-October 7th Jew is to perceive reality differently than most of the world. It is to live in an alternative Jewish universe where what is to us is urgent and self-evident is widely dismissed as irrelevant or outright lies. It is being forced to prove that Hamas's atrocities really happened, that mass rape was integral to its war strategy, that not Israel but its enemies are genocidal, that Jews around the world are facing a wave of hatred and physical threat not seen since the 1940s, that Jews don't cause anti-Semitism, that Israel has the right to defend itself, that a Jewish state has the right to exist. It is to experience so much rage, so much of the time that you feel you are about to explode. So while I want to get into the healing piece a little bit later, and you raised that important point, Lee, Yossi, now that the war is presumably over, this alternative universe hasn't shifted much. So has the rage subsided at all? And where's your attention focus now?
I think the campaign to turn Israel into the world's great criminal nation is going to be with us for a long time to come. It might define or help define Jewish life for this next generation. And so the rage that I feel, that I think so many Jews feel, is also a permanent part of the post-war reality. I don't think it's. I mean, New York seems about to elect a mayor who is passionate about only one foreign policy issue, and that's us. It doesn't matter that the war is over. And I was in London not long ago, and the Jewish community there is really focusing more and more on the question of, do we have a future here? And I think this is something that's happening across the diaspora, less so in the United States. I think because uh, the Jewish reality in America was always different, and I think it's still better than it is elsewhere. But you're feeling it too, and so this isn't going away. This is really part of it, and there actually, um, Lisa, there's something that I would like to touch on, which is how the the how the Jewish psyche is processing this moment. And what I feel uh, personally, and also among people that I know, is that October 7th brought back two of the deepest traumas of the Holocaust. The sense of aloneness, which is what you touched on. You read that in that quote. The sense that we're really alone in the world, and I don't think we are, but that's certainly the way so many Jews are experiencing this time. And also the criminalization of Jewish existence, which is being transferred, of course, onto Israel. And so these two traumas have resurfaced uh, in the Jewish psyche. I think they were always there, but we've learned to live with them. We learned to live around them, and and since October 7th, we are dealing with Holocaust-related traumas that many of us thought, we were on our way as a people to overcoming. And October 7th pushed us right back there. So I think that for me, that's the framing, the psychological framing of why this moment is so difficult. With everything else, there's this extra layer of resurrected trauma.
Mm.
You know, Lisa, I heard what Yossi is describing from so many of the bereaved families, people who are speaking about the day of October 7th as the day when this ancient wound of persecution was reopened for them. You know, Israelis are people who fled so many countries to come to Israel, if it's from Europe and from persecution in Arab countries and the former Soviet Union. And there are so many families who lost their loved ones on 10/7 that have lost many other people in previous generations. And a lot of people are saying, you know, as Israelis, 10/7 was the first time we felt like Jews again. And that's important to understand. And also, Yossi, what you said about the communities in London and people who are asking about their future there. You know, it's so interesting to look at the same time at the numbers of Israelis who are leaving Israel. You know, they're in a high
Yeah.
we've never seen before. In the last 4 years, we're speaking about over 250,000 Israelis who left the country. We don't know the final number for 2025, but it's been, you know, since the judicial overhaul and in this years of war, it's been increasing every year. And these are young Israelis, most of them under 40, very educated, who are feeling like they can't live in Israel, and they're feeling unsafe and concerned for democracy and are looking for new communities. And on the other hand, we're seeing more Aliyah files, like not Aliyah cases, not that people were actually making Aliyah, but more Jews in the diaspora who are thinking about making Aliyah, feeling like they're not safe in their communities. So it's Jews in all around the world who are feeling not safe and want to find a new community for themselves.
Mm.
Yeah, I would, if I could just complicate the picture even more, that on the one hand, and I agree with you, Lee, the in some ways what worries me the most about the consequences of the last 3 years, really, beginning with the government's assault on the judiciary, was the erosion of faith among young liberal Israelis in the future of the country, and that I think is an existential crisis. But what I wanted to add, to throw into the mix, is that I actually am very much opposed to Holocaust language in relation to October 7th. And 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 I was describing a psychological state, I think, that's very prevalent among Jews, and also, Lee, you're right, also Israelis. But I think that it's a mistake not to push back against that, because it's true
Right.
that on October 7th, we had a momentary lapse into victimhood, but it lasted all of one day. And on October 8th, Israeli society, Jewish Israeli society, politically wall to wall, made the decision that we're not going to stay in that condition of victimhood. We are going to reclaim our military deterrence, which was shattered on October 7th. And you can't look at the ruins of Gaza 2 years into this war uh, and and claim the mantle of victim. Now, I think we had no choice but to fight this war, and we probably had no choice but more or less to fight the war the way we did. I have some questions, but generally, I do uphold the way in which we fought the war, including the consequences, the terrible consequences for Gaza. I don't think that, given the conditions in Gaza, uh, I don't think there was really any other way to fight this war. But given the fact that we reasserted our power, and given the fact that Israelis really don't want to win the victimhood competition with the Palestinians, I think we want the Palestinians to win that competition. And so this very strange place that we're in is, on the one hand, we feel like we're victims again, but objectively speaking, we're not. And how do we navigate that? And it's even more complicated than that, because we feel as if, to be a victim means that you're innocent. And when we frame October 7th as the greatest catastrophe since the Holocaust, which I think is the wrong framing, I don't think anything that happens in Israel should be framed by what happened there. October 7th was the greatest catastrophe in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict, in 100 years of conflict. That's an extraordinary statement. I don't need the Holocaust in that mix. But what you also have, so on the one hand, though, so many Jews are feeling this return of the shadow of the Holocaust. And on the other hand, so many other Jews are feeling that we are now not victims, but victimizers. And I don't think that either category is a useful way of explaining our situation. I don't believe
Yeah.
we're victims, and I don't believe we're victimizers.
Mm.
And we seem to be in a kind of a loop where we go back and forth. We're either the most moral army in the world, we're either pure and innocent, or we're committing genocide. And these two polar opposite ways of describing this war, I think, only get us deeper into a psychological tangle.
Mm. I'm wondering if the way you're framing about the Israeli, the Jewish psyche at this point can somehow be used in the process of beginning to heal, right? Lee, you went
You
back
know,
to some of the families that you interviewed for your book and for the magazine article. You poignantly described how they aren't coping. And I think one or two of them also referred to the Holocaust and exactly what you said in terms of feeling so vulnerable, clearly, and devastated by what happened. And these are people who were most closely affected. They lost family members, were murdered or kidnapped or maimed. Can you share one or two stories and talk about how your conversations with them and what you've gleaned from them can somehow connect with this process of healing that's going to be such a slow one?
Absolutely. I mean, one of these families that I interviewed again is the Epstein-Lipstein family, an amazing family from Kibbutz Kfar Aza, one of these amazing peaceful kibbutzim near the Gaza border. And we need to say here and to remember that in so many ways, Hamas murdered the Israeli peace community. They murdered these people who believed in a Palestinian statehood near Israel and a two-state solution more than anyone else. And this family spoke with Ayelet Epstein, her son Neta, and 5 other members of her family were murdered on this morning of 10/7. Her son jumped on a grenade to save his girlfriend, and other members of her family. One of them is Ophir Lipstein, who was the head of the Shara Negev Council, a man who was busy in his last days in trying to establish this new industrial complex where Gazans and Israelis will be able to work together, because he believed that if we will work together, we will be able to live together better. And they are one of these incredible, inspiring families because they chose life, even though they lost so much. Ayelet's husband is now the head of the council, doing the job of his brother-in-law who was murdered, and trying to help this process of the healing of this kibbutzim. And you see a lot of conflicts and questions among them. A lot of them are asking themselves whether or not they can or they should go back and live in this area of Otef Aza, of the Gaza envelope. If, some of these homes in Kfar Aza were now rebuilt, and then because of the bombs, because of the war with Gaza, some of the windows were broken again. So they needed to renovate them again. And people are asking, will it ever be safe to live here? And do we want to continue what was stopped so horribly on October 7th, or do we want to try and find a new future for our families, if in Israel or if abroad? There is a real crisis in these communities, and in a way in the Israeli peace community, among this public that always believed in peace and now asking themselves questions. We see a lot of people who turned right-wing and do not believe in our option to have a two-state solution anymore. We see the numbers when you ask Israelis in general about it and how it shifted so much the last decade, and especially after the war. But we also see some bereaved families who are working with Palestinian bereaved families and speaking about the grief that unites us, and are trying now more than ever to try and find a solution. And when Trump spoke at the Knesset, when the hostages came back and said the word peace, I was like, it was so refreshing. I don't think we heard the word peace in so long. And it's so important that it's back in the conversation. And, to raise one more topic here, next week, we're going to mention 30 years since the murder of Yitzhak Rabin. And for my generation, it means a lot. And I think a lot of people forget that over 50% of the Israelis were 30 years old or younger. 70% of the Palestinians are in this age. And it means that we were born, with or after the assassination of Rabin. And in so many ways, after the murder of the hope for peace with Rabin. I heard about these days of the Oslo Accords and the real hope to finish this conflict from my parents. But I never lived a day of my life with real hope that we can solve it, that we wouldn't just live in this constant wars. And my generation was always told that Israel is so strong and that the Iron Dome and technology will be enough to protect us and give us a good enough life as Israelis. And I think these 2 years of war and 10/7 kind of broke this promise. And a lot of young Israelis are thinking again about their future. And I really, really hope that it will be our generation to continue this task of Rabin and to find a way to end this conflict and find a way for a two-state solution. Because if this war showed us anything, is that I don't think we need to play this game of who's more of a victim. It's been horrible for everyone, and I really wish to both Israelis and Palestinians a different future.
Yossi, what's your take on this? You once held the position that a Palestinian state is both a existential need and an existential threat. And clearly October 7th demonstrated the existential threat piece. So do you still hold that view, or have you moved like a lot of Israelis and Jews throughout the world that since it's so obvious now that there's really no chance of a peace, at least with the Palestinians?
I think that October 7th, in a complicated way, affirmed both of those statements. Certainly, the notion of creating a Palestinian state in the West Bank, which is our most sensitive border, overlooking the coastal plain, overlooking Ben Gurion Airport, bordering on Jerusalem, and risking bringing Gaza into the West Bank, strikes most Israelis today, including many on the left, as unthinkable, as really an act of madness. But I also think that October 7th reaffirmed the wisdom of Ariel Sharon's withdrawal from Gaza. Because what October 7th also proved is that Israelis and Palestinians cannot live together in one political entity between the river and the sea. We cannot live with Gaza. We can't create a shared society with Gaza. And I don't believe we can do it with the Palestinians in the West Bank either. And so I don't think that October 7th has really brought greater clarity, one way or the other, to this dilemma that we've had for 50 years. And that dilemma is that the left is right about democracy and demography, about the dangers to Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. And the right is right about borders and security. And so that has been the kind of stalemate that has defined Israeli politics for many years. And it's also a stalemate for many of us. I define myself politically as a centrist. And my definition of a centrist on this issue in particular is that a centrist is an Israeli who internalizes the opposing truths of left and right so that they're not arguing out there in Israeli society, they're arguing within me. And those two voices struggle within me. My position, my personal position, is that the only thing that's worse than a two-state solution is a one-state non-solution, a binational state. Because what a binational state will do is internalize the conflict. I would much rather fight this war from, from a recognized border. I'd rather fight this war externally than internally. And and so I guess what I'm really saying is that how October 7th impacted on me was not politically, because I still believe that these two peoples need to separate, but I believe less than I ever did before in the realistic chances of reconciliation between these two peoples. Now, just to complicate the picture a little bit more, at the same time, I think that we have a chance for the first time in the history of this conflict to end the Sunni world's war against Israel. You know, for most of this of Israel's nearly 8 decades, the conflict was defined by as a Sunni-Israeli conflict. And the Abraham Accords really offer us the possibility of ending the Sunni war against Israel. Now, I don't believe that we can negotiate a bilateral peace agreement between Israelis and Palestinians. I think that that model is over. I also think that the Clinton proposals and this notion of the Palestinians are going to get a state on 100% of the territory and we're going to redivide Jerusalem. I think October 7th put a definitive end to that possibility. And the truth is, it really ended 25 years ago with the Second Intifada. But certainly October 7th is the seal on the irrelevance of the Clinton model. But within the context of a regional agreement between the Sunni world and Israel, I could see a possibility of some form of arrangement. And I'm weighing my words very carefully. I'm not speaking about a solution. I'm not speaking about an end to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I don't know if we're going to see an end to that conflict, but some way of shifting us, moving us away from permanent occupation of another people, moving us away from where this government is taking us, which is to annexation, and opening up some other possibilities. I can see that being an outcome of October 7th.
Hmm.
But again, I think we need to free ourselves from the outmoded model of Oslo and the Clinton proposals. The international community is still very much in the 1990s, and I don't think the Middle East is in the 1990s anymore.
Hmm.
Right. What I mostly meant, Yossi, and I agree with some of the things you said, is that we try to forget about Palestinians. Israel in the last 2 decades, and with the leadership of Netanyahu, what we were told is that we can forget about that, we can put the conflict aside and everything will be okay. And I think it's, one of the outcomes of this war on October 7th is that we understand that we can do that. We can't just live our lives with the conflict. And there are many, many Israelis who understand more than ever that we need to find a solution that will be just and will allow a better life for Israelis and for Palestinians who have been suffering, and like you said, we see the extreme right wing and the settlers are trying to move forward with their ideas and their solutions of annexation in the West Bank that I think is very dangerous for Israelis and for a future. And I think that people from the left and the center who does not want, like you said, a one-state solution or want, justice for everyone, we need to come up with other and better solutions and start speaking about it seriously. I think we weren't really speaking about it enough. And, for me, and I think for a lot of my generation, the two-state solution is still the best option out of the options we have. I don't know if it's a perfect one, but we should definitely take it more seriously and have this conversation. And that's what I meant that, in the day that Trump was in the Knesset, and even the word peace was said again without, a lot of times when you said peace in Israel before, it was like saying it like, oh, you're so naive, you still believe in peace, or you're so, it became something that sometimes the extreme right would accuse people of being almost traitors for believing in peace or speaking with Palestinians. So it's been very refreshing when we could say that again proudly.
In
So I agree with you, Lee, that we were fooling ourselves over the last 25 years. I think in several ways. We deluded ourselves into thinking we could avoid the Palestinian issue. We also deluded ourselves into thinking we could live next door to terrorist entities that were committed to our destruction and that repeatedly told us that one of these days we're going to cross that border and we're coming after you. And so we pretended that we could somehow live around this and live our relatively normal lives. And that, of course, ended on October 7th. My disagreement with you is over the word solution. I don't think that there is a solution to the Palestinian tragedy. Uh, well, look, there is a solution, and I am for a two-state solution, but I don't think it's possible in the ways that we've spoken about a two-state solution in the past. I don't think it's possible on our end. We're not going to redivide Jerusalem. The Palestinians will not accept a two-state solution without a capital in Jerusalem. I don't believe that the Israeli public will support that, and I don't think we should support it. And I used to be much more flexible on this issue. And the other on their side, on the Palestinian side, I don't see any Palestinian movement, any leadership that would be prepared to give up the dream, which is our nightmare, of a mass return of descendants of Palestinian refugees to the state of Israel. That has become so embedded in Palestinian identity and politics that I don't see any Palestinian leader being able to offer us the concession we need on right of return. And Tzipi Livni, our former foreign minister, who I would call her these days, I think she is certainly left of center. Tzipi Livni was once asked, how many Palestinians should Israel accept in a back should accept into Israel in the framework of a peace agreement? And her answer was exactly zero. And I think that that's exactly right. And so if that's our position, there is no way to bridge the gap. And now we can certainly come to some form of arrangement with the Palestinians within the context of a regional peace agreement. But the notion that we're going to be able to satisfy minimal Palestinian demands, the gaps between their minimal demands and our minimal needs is just too great. So I just don't see that happening anytime soon. For me, the most important goal right now is to stop this government from moving us to annexation. We need to, and curbing settler violence. There are very practical issues that we need to confront. And I think it's very premature to be talking about two-state solution and a breakthrough on the Palestinian front.
So I want to shift the focus. Obviously, this is a very important conversation and one we could continue for a long time, but I want to shift the focus a little bit to Israeli diaspora relations, particularly with American Jewry. You both have spent considerable amount of time in the United States, even since October 7th. And I imagine you've witnessed both the strengthening of connection and ties among Jews who have always felt strongly and connected to Israel, and also those Jews who we call October 8th Jews, who suddenly woke up after October 7th and found meaning in their Jewishness, which is a significant portion of the Jewish community in the United States. But we've also seen the simultaneous growing estrangement and, in fact, virulent and often hostile opposition to Israel and anti-Zionist sentiments taking hold in very strong ways. So, Yossi, let's start with you. As an American-born Jew, you've been involved with and an observer of American Jewish life for a very long time. So, even from your perch now in Jerusalem, how do you make sense of these seemingly contradictory trends?
I think that in so many issues related to the post October 7th reality, um, American Jews are living in a condition of acute confusion. And it goes back to what I was trying to say earlier, where on the one hand we feel like we're victims again, on the other hand, many Jews would say we've become victimizers, and so there's this um, welter of emotions and contradictory conclusions about where we are and who we are as a people. I'm you know I've devoted my my professional life, my Jewish commitment to trying to help bring Israel and American Jewry closer together. And when I moved to Israel, I worked as a journalist writing from Israel, basically for American Jews. The publications that I wrote for were read, even the general publications were read mostly by Jews. So I've been really trying to be a kind of translator of Israeli reality for American Jews. And increasingly, I find that I'm unable to perform that function for any American Jews who aren't already deeply committed to Israel. I find that I'm losing my language, and so so I'm also in a state of flux. And look, as an Israeli, my focus has really been certainly the year leading up to October 7th, and it's beginning again now. My focus is on the tremendous damage that this government of ultras in Israel is doing to the relationship. You know, ultra orthodox, ultra nationalist, I would add ultra corrupt, and the impact that this government is having on American Jewish Israeli relations is catastrophic. Would things be better if we didn't have this government in place? If we had a government like Naftali Bennett's 3 years ago that really was looking for more cohesiveness in Israeli society? I think so, uh, and I think it would staunch some of the alienation. But I think there are deeper trends that we have to confront. And what worries me is what's happening simultaneously uh, on a grassroots level among Israelis and among American Jews, young Israelis and young American Jews. In Israel, the ultra nationalist, anti democratic far right is growing. And in America, among American Jews, the anti Zionist left is growing as well. And you know the ultra nationalists in Israel essentially see democracy as a as an impediment to Israel being able to defend itself against terrorism. And among anti-Zionist young Jews, the notion of a Jewish state is seen increasingly as illegitimate. And so if these two trends continue to grow, we're going to see an historic rupture between the two great centers of Jewish life. And that's what keeps me up at night, the rise of forces in Israel that negate Israel as a democratic state, and the rise of forces among American Jewry that negate Israel as a Jewish state.
Do you see any way to combat those trends?
Well, yeah, I mean the most important way I think is to change governments in Israel. We need to have and it doesn't matter if it's a right wing government. It just needs to be a normative right wing government. Uh, what Netanyahu did to the Likud was take a venerable nationalist liberal party, and that may sound like an oxymoron to American sensibilities, but historically the Likud was a liberal nationalist party. Agree or not with its positions, but it was as committed to democracy as the Labor Party was. And that is not the case under Netanyahu. Netanyahu has destroyed the democratic ethos of the Likud and turned it into an extension of the far right. You look at some of the Knesset members for the Likud, and there's no practical difference between them and Ben Gvir and his party. And so we desperately need a change in government.
So, Lee, your experience with American Jewry is perhaps a little bit newer, but you have really been on this big speaking tour and going to communities all across the country and Europe. But tell me what you have learned about American Jewry in terms of their connection to Israel, their knowledge of Israel, and what, if anything, has surprised you?
One thing that I saw in common in all of these American communities is that no one speaks Hebrew, even though they go to Hebrew school for so many years. Another thing was that there is, so many inner conflicts between reform and conservative and local JCCs and federation and, the kind of mistrust that I know from home. But to be serious, I think I see that both Israelis and American Jews are in this crisis, in this crossroads, like you described. And we feel like it is the same crisis, but it's actually two very different crises that we're dealing with. American Jews are suffering from anti-Semitism and are really concerned about that. And, they've been experiencing things that changed their lives. I'm now in St. Louis, speaking here for a few days, just spoke yesterday with college students who have been, moving between two universities, and one of them moved between three universities just looking for a place where they can feel safe. It's something we've never seen before. And Israelis do not understand anti-Semitism. We don't understand it as Israelis. We've never experienced it as Israelis. And in a way, you can say that what's happening to Jews in the world and anti-Semitism is good for Netanyahu. It's great for his government. It's not great for Israelis, but it's great for this coalition. And I don't think American Jews understand that, and they don't understand what Israelis are worried about, which is very much the things Yossi just described. Israelis are worried about democracy. They're worried about the West Bank. They're worried about how expensive it is in Israel. Many, many things that are, there is a real crisis in Israel, but it's a different one. And, one of the things that communities keep asking me is this way of how can we still support Israel and the idea of Israel and having a Jewish state that we know is now more important than ever, but also criticize this government or some of the ways this war was conducted. People are having this difficulty to find a way to both believe in the idea of Israel but not support his government, which is something that we Israelis, it's very, we don't have this conflict. I feel that, out of my love to my country, I should criticize a government that is not good for it. So I think these are some of the challenges I've been seeing.
Mm. With your permission, we're going to go a little longer because we have some good questions from the audience. Is that all right with both of you? I'm not giving you a choice, really. So I do want to go to some of the questions because obviously, this conversation could go on for hours. So one question we have is, Yossi, if you were to write letters to my Palestinian neighbor today, would it differ? And if so, how?
I'm not sure that I would have been able to write that book, certainly not in the immediate aftermath of October 7th. Not because I disagree with anything that I wrote there. I pretty much still believe what the message of that book was. But writing that book required a certain amount of overcoming obstacles in myself and dredging up a certain generosity of spirit and an empathy for Palestinians. And after October 7th, like many Israelis, I went into deep freeze. I was incapable of really paying attention to what the Palestinians were going through in this war. That began to change in the last months, and I started to thaw. But I'm still really in a transition, and it's actually a very relevant question for me because I'm working on a book now, and one of the chapters is about the Palestinians, and I I haven't found a language yet how to speak about the Palestinians, or even whether I can speak directly to Palestinians. I lost, after October 7th, I lost a fair amount of my connections on the Palestinian side, not all of them. I've still managed to hold on to a few friendships, but and those are all the more precious because they've become increasingly rare. And there certainly are voices on the Palestinian side that are desperate for reconciliation. And I've always felt a responsibility to stand with those people. And I do feel that way now. I just don't know if I'm capable of it. And that's the most honest answer I can give.
Hmm. One of our audience members is asking, how does empathy affect things now? And I think that applies in almost every realm we've talked about. But Lee, you want to take that first?
Sure. I mean, I love this question because I feel like empathy is so, so important. And, in this polarized world that we're living, when, everyone just hears their own side, I think we're really lacking empathy. You can say that, if we're dreaming about a political solution, we need to start with a human solution. And what's a human solution? That's empathy, right? I chose to write my book as stories of civilians and human beings because I hate when people are speaking about Israel just through its politicians and are reducing all of us Israelis to our government. We have amazing people and very diverse people and diverse stories. There are in Israel communities. I saw someone asking in the chat of Arab Israelis, for example. 22% of the Israeli population is Palestinian Israeli or Arab Israeli stories. There are, refugees from Ukraine and Russia who are living in Israel. There's so many different communities. And I believe that when we tell human stories and when we share our human experiences, it's the best way to create empathy. And, I try to read as many stories that I can of Palestinian suffering and speak with my Palestinian colleagues as well. And I truly believe that we need to start to have a dialogue and listen to each other. And going back for a moment to what you asked before about, what I've learned in the US and then in Europe, it's been really interesting because in Europe, I felt like there was more ability to have a conversation. When I was book touring in France and Germany, just came back from Sweden, there were more panels of Israelis and Palestinians together, and people being able and willing to hear from Israelis together with Palestinians. And in the US, I feel like cancellation culture is so strong that so many people, are just outside of Jewish communities, are just afraid to hear anything that can look like they're supporting of Israel. They don't want to have any dialogue. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter, that so many of these victims were people who believed in peace. They don't even want to hear from these families sometimes. We're seeing people denying the sexual atrocities that happened. So there was something that I expected it to be the opposite way. Before I came to the US, I was expecting the US to be much more open and that there will be much more dialogue in the US and less in Europe. And I've learned that it was the opposite way. Yeah.
Very interesting contrast that you're discovering. So I have a couple questions that I'm going to morph into my last question for Yossi, which is these questions. Somebody says that I've been reading and getting many insights from Yitz Greenberg's The Triumph of Life. One is that we should not be consumed with fighting evil, but to spend most of our energy championing life. The other is Israel important for the survival of Judaism? And Yossi, I want you to take those into consideration when you talk about the book that you're working on that you mentioned, but if I'm not mistaken, it's really about the meaning of Jewish survival. So, and what we can learn from our history for this moment. So it's kind of a big last question, but I'd like you to address that.
I love Yitz Greenberg. I love his book. He's been my teacher. He's one of the people I'm dedicating my book to. But I don't agree with that observation. If that's what Yitz said, then I disagree with that, because I think that part of the role that the Jewish people has played, certainly in the last 100 years, is to be a lightning rod for evil. We have been targeted successively over the last century by the three great totalitarian movements that have tried to remake humanity in its image: Nazism, Soviet communism, and now Islamism. And each of these totalitarian ideologies defined the Jew as the great enemy, the obstacle for their fulfillment of for their ability to transform humanity in their image. So I think that whether we want to or not, we find ourselves repeatedly on the front line against evil, and that somehow seems to be part of who we are as a people, certainly in the era of modernity. In terms of trying to understand why Israel is central to Jewish life, I think that I'm hesitant to try to sum up a really a kind of key argument of my book, because I'm still in the middle of writing it, and Lee, I think you can appreciate that when you're working on a book, you're so reluctant to talk about it.
Right.
But I don't know how else to answer your question, Lisa. So I'll try. And that is that I think that what is so extraordinary about the creation of Israel after the Holocaust, and I don't believe that Israel is the result of the Holocaust. That's very important for me to preface with what I'm about to say, because that's what the anti-Zionists say, that why should the Palestinians have paid the price for the Holocaust? Israel exists because on some level it never stopped existing. It remained central in Jewish consciousness. It remained central to Jewish aspirations wherever Jews were in any part of the world. for 2,000 years, and there's no story like that in history. It's a totally bizarre story. It's a surreal story. The story of the Jewish attachment to this land that we lost, never renounced, always believed we would reclaim, and one day actually did. It's a totally irrational story. And so I'm making a distinction between the cause and effect. Israel exists because of its centrality in Jewish consciousness and because of Jewish longing, not just because of the persecution of Jews. But there was some very powerful spiritual connection for me, that I see in the creation of Israel immediately after the Holocaust. And that is that what the Jewish people decided after the Holocaust, which was the realization of the greatest nightmare that Jews could possibly have. The greatest nightmare was fulfilled in the Holocaust. And the Jewish response to that was not to say, okay, now let's rebuild what was destroyed. That was actually the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox response, which is whatever was destroyed, we'll simply rebuild. The overwhelming majority of the Jewish people said that level of destruction requires a totally new strategy. And what we as a people need to do to answer apocalypse is to try to implement the Jewish fantasy of redemption, which was a return to the land and a Jewish state. And it was always this impossible idea. And the Holocaust was an impossible event. It is an event that could not have happened until it actually did. And the response of the Jewish people was to go for broke, to meet our greatest nightmare with our greatest dream. And that's the power, I think, the mythic power of Israel. And so one can answer the question of why Israel is central to Judaism, to Jewish life, in lots of different ways. For me, as someone who came of age in the years immediately after the Holocaust, that's kind of built in to my understanding of the spiritual meaning of Israel. And the last point that I'll make here, and this is really in some ways a response to the anti-Zionist Jews, or those Jews who are starting to distance themselves from Israel. You can't have been, I'll put it, the Jewish people carried this crazy dream for 2,000 years. And then they actually fulfilled it. And we are living in the aftermath of the fulfillment. And to some extent, any dream that's fulfilled disappoints. That's the nature of reality. But the Jewish people, if we, God forbid, if we lose Israel, if Israel fails for whatever reason, external pressure, more likely internal disintegration, if we blow it, then we have in some way retroactively discredited those thousands of years of longing, and where the return to this land was the center point of Jewish aspiration and identity. And so you can't have been a people that carried this impossible dream, fulfills the dream, and then loses it. That's the question that in some ways October 7th opened up. Because there's now a question, it's an open question. Is the destruction of Israel possible? And we experience a kind of reenactment in microcosm of the destruction of Israel on October 7th. And so the question that we need to answer is what would happen to us as a people if we fulfilled this dream and then squandered it? That, I think, is really what we're facing now.
Mm. Lee, do you have a note of hope that you'd like to end on?
Sure. I mean, I wanted first to respond, to what Yossi said. It's been, I'm a grandchild of Holocaust survivors from my father's side. From my mother's side, our surname to this day is Adato, which in Hebrew Gematria spells 1496, which is the year that my family was deported from Portugal with the rest of the Portuguese Jews. So, both sides of my family have been looking for a safe place for many, many generations and have paid, heavy prices coming to Israel, dealing with everything it meant with a new language and a new culture and living in poverty, making aliyah and, establishing this dream of the Jewish state wasn't easy for the people who did it, but it was a real dream of theirs to allow me and my parents and my brother and this generation a better life. So I agree with Yossi that, we've achieved this dream and we cannot give it up. And I have no question about how much we need a home, a safe home for Jews. Um, and I think the elections that we're going to in Israel in 2026 will be so important and that we need a lot of hope for them. I take some inspiration and hope from new political ideas that are coming right now together. For example, the idea of a new party or a new political force of that will be of bereaved families and hostages families. I think these are among the people that are the most worthy of leading Israel right now. People like Rachel Goldberg-Polin, like Eli Sharabi, these are people who've experienced the worst and have been functioning as an alternative government in a way for 2 years, going and speaking with leaders all around the world that have experienced the worst. And I think a lot of people want this kind of, of new leadership that comes from the people and not comes from politicians. So I'll be looking forward to a leadership like that we need so desperately.
Mm. I think there are a lot of people around the world who would like to see Rachel Goldberg-Polin become Prime Minister of Israel. Is there really talk of a political party forming from these individuals?
I can't speak particularly about Rachel, even though I'll agree with that and I'll vote for her if she'll do it. But there are some of these families that are speaking about we saw one of them joining one of the parties, and there are some talks about forming a new power and joining other parties, and I think that will be very interesting.
Mm. Well, that is a note of hope. And I want to thank both of you, Yossi and Lee, for being with us for this very important conversation. I want you to sit tight while we just give some announcements at the end. I want to tell you about some upcoming programs. On November 23rd, our next Hadassah Magazine Presents podcast will take place at the Miami Book Fair, where I'll be interviewing Pam Nadel, a leading historian of American Jewish history who has an important new book being released this month called Antisemitism: An American Tradition, about the history of antisemitism in the United States. If you live in the Miami area, you can attend the event in person. Just look up the Miami Book Fair for information on how to get tickets. For everyone else, that podcast episode will be available at the end of November. And on December 8th at 8 p.m., we'll be back with a live virtual event like this one with Rabbi Angela Bookdahl, the spiritual leader of Central Synagogue in Manhattan, who is considered one of the most inspiring and influential rabbis in America today. We'll be discussing her journey from South Korea, where she was born, to the rabbinate, the challenges as well as the joy of being a rabbi in these times, as well as her new memoir, Heart of a Stranger. If you haven't yet discovered our podcast, wherever you find your podcast, be sure to do so. You'll still want to register for these live events to be part of the real-time conversation and be able to ask questions of our guests. But in case you miss it, you'll be able to get the podcast and listen while taking a walk, commuting, or cooking dinner. And you can share it with your family and friends. In addition to listening and sharing today's conversation with Yossi and Lee, which will be available in the next few days, you'll find earlier conversations with Maya Arad, Mayim Bialik, Dara Horn, and Ayelet Sabari. Find it wherever you get your podcasts or on the podcast page of hadassah.org, where you can sign up for alerts to learn when new episodes drop. I want to thank Libby Barnea, our deputy editor who helped plan and implement this program, along with the magazine's digital editor, Ariel Kaplan, who both promoted and produced it. And a shout out to our partners in the engagement and marketing and communication divisions who always play an important role in making these events happen. A reminder that a follow-up email will get to you tomorrow with links to a recording of this session, podcast information, and also ways to purchase Lee's and Yossi's latest books, along with more information about their work, as well as links to donate to Hadassah and become a member of the organization. So a huge thank you to Yossi and Lee, both of you, for taking the time to share your insights and wisdom with us. We wish you all well and strength as the healing path begins and continues.
Thank you. Good to be with you all. Lee, wonderful
Thank
to
you
be with
so
you.
much. Thank you, Yossi. Thank you, Lisa. It was a pleasure.
And thank you all for joining us today. I hope to see you back at our next program. Stay safe and warm, and until next time.